from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
No apologies.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee?
Thank you for the question. So in the last 18 months, the Access for All programme in Network Rail has been through a period of quite intense independent reviews. That's focused on both our CP6 performance, so that's our change control period 6, which completed this year, in terms of how we'd gone through the development and delivery of those schemes. We've also then, off the back of those reviews, entered into a period of reform of the portfolio. In June this year, Network Rail took the steps in agreement with DfT to introduce what's called a portfolio sponsorship office. So that's the part of the business that I look after. That's a national oversight for the Access for All programme. We are leading on accountability, both of the delivery of those schemes, which are still either in design, development or out for implementation currently. But we're also looking at and working with partners in terms of how we reform the delivery of those projects going forward. So that's a real focus for us as we go into change control period 7, which we're into now and will be into for the next 5 years. I would add in May this year, so just before the election, the government announced a further 50 Access for All schemes nationally and made the commitment to take those into feasibility. One of our key learnings from CP6 and our delivery of projects is that it's very important that we go and do a very thorough study in terms of feasibility and then development of those schemes. That being, it gives us greater cost certainty, programme certainty. It means we can do things like work with our supply chain in terms of how those schemes are best packaged and delivered efficiently for taxpayers. And it also means that through that development period, we can work with transport agencies, operators, disability groups and local authorities about what those schemes should be and what the scope of them is.
Thanks very much for that answer. Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the decision-making process. So how does Network Rail reassure itself that decisions taken over the type of improvements, for example, lifts, footbridges, ramps that are delivered at a station through Access for All funding are appropriate?
So the process for determining those schemes starts right at nomination. So those change control periods that I talked about, around 12 months before the start of a new change control period is when we start what's the nominations process and becomes the Access for All portfolio. At that point, we issue nomination forms out and a covering letter that goes from the DfT. It goes to Network Rail, but it also goes to local authorities, it goes to operators, transport groups. They have around 6 months to make those nominations. Once those are collated, they go through a period of review both by Network Rail and the department in terms of what those schemes are that are put forward. We also use independent consultants and we use DIPTAC, which is a DfT forum, so that's disabled persons.
Transport Advisory.
There you go, that's the one that I've been trying to remember all morning and I knew I'd forget it again. Once that's done, those are then shortlisted.
Yep.
We go through another period of review with DfT and Network Rail. We look at things like what are the local user groups, what are the alternatives in the area, are there particular groups that we need to consider in the local geography. That's all then fed back into the DfT and informed to ministers so that they can then make a final decision and a statement on what those schemes look like. So that then determines the 50 that I mentioned that were confirmed in May this year.
And the data analysis is also used to inform decisions. Is that based primarily on footfall?
Footfall is included in it, so we know schemes for the south, particularly around London, they always have a fantastic business case in terms of the number of users that can benefit from that, but we do also look at other things, as I say, such as what are the alternatives, are there other alternatives close by in the geography? Are there particular users or groups that we know about? Also, what does that wider regeneration piece look like? And the bigger socio-economic picture.
So the Office of Rail and Road conducts annual assessments on the Network Rail stakeholder engagement. It actually refers and highlights the Motspur Park Access for All work in South West London, which included engagement with all local communities. And it also included me. So I'm the local councillor for that area, for West Barnes. And I know that the footfall data was a real issue for us on getting that lift on that station. Because people didn't use that station because it was so inaccessible. And actually, that data wasn't very helpful for that decision in the end. So would you agree with me that actually there's a lot of local need and push for campaigning in some ways, like we had to do for decades, to get that lift into that station. So it's not just about data, it is also about local community pushing you to make those decisions.
I apologise if that's felt like it was a necessary step. It shouldn't be. We should have the right data that informs us making those decisions. We obviously, we do work with stakeholders and local groups and neighbours around really understanding the needs of the community. That data will not always be accurate, and that's why that engagement is so important to us. But as I say, I would apologise if it was felt that the personal push and the local push was the thing that made the difference, because it should be largely data-driven. But
yeah, I mean, you don't need to apologise, but I think at the end of the day, it does take a lot of effort to get step-free access at these stations, and sometimes the data isn't what really makes the decision at the end of the day. It's actually local community efforts.
Do you want to touch on the data, Alison?
Yeah, if I could. So I agree. I think data gets you so far, and then that local context is vital. And also, we've done a lot to look at beyond just footfall implications, actual end-to-end journey implications, because a lot of journeys may end in big stations or may start in big stations, but they're either going through much smaller stations, and that interchange is really important, or just the start of the journey being as accessible as the end of the journey, or vice versa, is really, really vital. So we have introduced the capability to understand total journey impacts when we think about.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that also you need confirmed support of the local MP as well, which I think is interesting in itself, because it wasn't that actually got it over the line for us at Motspur Park. It was, a lot of work from the councillors, myself included, having to work with the local council, getting agreement from the local council to match fund with you guys as well. There's a lot more work to it to get support and get a station with a lift, and it really does take decades, and I think that is a massive shame, particularly for the smaller stations. So just on another point in terms of those decisions, at the beginning stage, how much at the earlier stages do you engage with particularly disabled groups? I think that you do have a Network Rail Built Environment Advisory Panel. Are they at the decision point as well? Are they involved with that process at that earlier stage?
Sorry, can I just clarify, do you mean the nominations or that kind of feasibility and development? So BEEP we do engage with. We also engage with DIPTAC that I mentioned earlier, so they are part of the nominations process, and they're the DFT advisory committee that are involved as well.
Excellent. Do you have, you may not know the answer to this, but do you have actually anyone who's disabled within Network Rail that's actually employed within the decision-making process at all?
So we do have people involved in those groups that do have disabilities that
are employed.
Yeah. And what we also do is we have super users. So not just in BEEP, but what I'm referring to there is we go through DIAs, so disability impact assessments. That's part of the process of the feasibility and the development of those schemes. Those super users are not just looking for accessibility in the sense of those that might be of reduced mobility, but it's also about auditory, visual, other impairments that people may have, as well as just, somebody is trying to access station with a suitcase. So we do consider 9, I think, protected characteristics through that.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I mean, we're having a very exciting opening for the lift coming up, 100-year anniversary of the actual station, and we're very keen to see you there. And also, we're hoping to get some investment in a big sign that you can help us fund. because we want to make it look snazzy and wonderful when we do the big opening and the big celebrations for this 100-year anniversary. So thank you.
I'd love to personally follow up with you on that. That would be great.
Let's see you there. It'll be lovely to have you there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Assemblymember Bakari. Yes. Yeah. Not everyone can put in their requests in. Assemblymember Bakari has got in there first. So, Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. Yeah. Anything else? New to this. Sure, I'd have known by now, wouldn't you? Sorry, first, Mr. Cayley. Some organisations have described the competitive bidding process for Access for All as time-consuming and inefficient. Do you agree with that assessment?
Do I agree with it? I agree that it's possibly a process that we could look to simplify, and we're committed to always looking and reviewing those processes. What I would add is that given the number of nominations and obviously the fiscal challenges that we face right across the country, we do need to make sure that they're robust and we capture the necessary aspects of those schemes. That's all about, again, making sure that it's a well-informed decision, that we do reflect on, those things like the users, the footfall that we've got, and actually think about the infrastructure itself and that complexity of us going and making those interventions.
On the process, I mean, clearly I can understand why you would go for the stations with the highest footfall, because you'd get the maximum return, but also just does geography come into it? So, for instance, in my neck of the woods, as an example, there is limited accessibility in Elm Park, but then it goes out to Hornchurch, Upminster, no level access to those two stations, and you have to go to Upminster. I have made suggestions in the past that would make Hornchurch more accessible, but they were just ignored. Would it not be right to look at that sort of geographical mapping as well, to say that so many people from X distance can or cannot have accessible transport?
Yes, we do look at the geography, so consideration is made around, I said what are the alternatives, but that includes proximity of, let's say, another station. We also, when we're looking at these solutions going forward, need to make sure that we're really challenging ourselves around what we call is the minimum viable product for those schemes. And what we recognise is that actually there's an opportunity there for us to go and make interventions or even make operational solutions rather than changing the infrastructure, which is difficult, which would open up more accessibility. So it may be that it's not a footbridge and lifts, but we can do something with ramps instead. So as a business and as a focus for CP7, we will be really challenging ourselves about what are the right solutions, and therefore how can we adopt the right one and put it in place as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Well, that's what's so frustrating about Hornchurch. All you had to do was open a gate, and then wheelchairs would have been able to access the station, but for some reason you chose not to do that. Who could I talk to have a visit and look at that?
That's not a scheme that I am personally familiar with, but I would be happy to follow that up afterwards.
It's
Chair.
TfL, obviously, but okay. You've said the process is not perfect, and I don't suppose anyone can design a perfect process, to be perfectly fair. But what areas would you improve in the process? And the good question that Hina asked, actually, my friend over there, about why do you have to have the permission of the MP? You know, sometimes it's always the local councillors putting the effort in. And I can't imagine there would be a Member of Parliament who would ever object to having a station being accessible. So why do you add that layer of bureaucracy unnecessarily?
In terms of the process and what we're looking to improve, we do still need to go through for change control period 7. So although we've announced the 50, or the ministers have announced the 50 for feasibility, there's still mid-tier to consider. So there is still the opportunity for us to look at that process that we go through. Something that we're very keen on for CP7 and working with Alison's team on is actually what are some of those smaller interventions that we would consider under something like a mid-tier, but can go a long way in terms of accessibility for stations. And accessibility for passengers. Certainly for me, I would love to see us do something quicker. And I recognise that that may mean us considering what that process looks like and what amount of information that we need. Because we've got such a focus on data, how we use data of the infrastructure, which I'm sure Alison could pick up on, we should really be able to use that to inform the decisions as opposed to, asking for that to be given to us. We hold that data, therefore it's right for us to use it. So could you remind me of your second question?
It was about the MP. Why do you ask? Why do you have to have the permission? Why do you have to have the permission of the Member of Parliament? I can't imagine any MP disagreeing to having better access to one of their stations, and it just seems like an extra layer and time taken up unnecessarily.
I'm not sure of the exact specifics. I don't know if you know, Alison.
So the selection criteria is actually set by DFT. That's just one element that is a factor in a decision. I dare, so I'll have to speak on their behalf, and so you'll forgive me if I haven't exactly answered this correctly on their behalf. I don't think it's a case that that's the determining factor. It's just a factor, and obviously it's helpful in the sense, MPs look after constituencies in which there are, a number of stations, and they'll be a good voice of their that they will be a good voice of that wider constituency to say this particular station in this in the wider portfolio of stations that may sit in that. Plus, there'd be opportunities for them to understand how that decision might influence wider factors, which sit outside the direct remit of the transport agenda, but will consider wider regeneration opportunities that they're pushing for. So it's not the thing that determines it. It is a helpful part of it, and ultimately DFT have set those selection criteria.
Yeah, I would have thought like the leader of the council or something like that would have actually have more influence and have a bigger picture on that. Just one final question, actually, in relation to the finances. Is it just a case that you wait for people to bid for a project, or do you sort of have a broad overview of where the need is and a rough idea of how much you would really need to do all that needs to be done?
So we have got a view of that, and actually that's been greatly informed by the audit that DFT undertook between 2021 and 2023, which we got that full data set transitioned across to GBRTT just last year. We've done quite a lot of work with that data set to understand exactly what the gaps look like across the network, not just in step-free terms, but across a variety of different station facilities, which in combination mean a journey through that particular station will be accessible to as many people as possible. And we've developed different ways to understand and assess the impact of different schemes in different parts of the network in terms of journey benefits to the whole network, general connectivity benefits, tackling pockets of isolation, which will have a wider socio-economic benefit and eliminate some of that aspect of inequality. So we are progressively improving our ability to make, I think, smarter decisions, not just on step-free, but taking a full package of improvements And we're starting to we're sharing that analysis and that insight now with all the train companies. DfT have access to that, local authorities, local transport authorities. We're actively talking to TfL about their contribution both into maintaining that data set, because there's about 136 stations that made up the total audit scope that are TfL operated under either underground, overground or TfL rail. So that's, we are desperately keen to improve some of the decision-making capability and that data set's actually been really helpful. On its own, no, because it just gave us a huge list of gaps. But we've managed to combine that with lots of other contextual data about stations, where they are, as I said, their contribution to general connectivity across the network. Footfall is in there inevitably, but also some of those, what local services are in close proximity, what are some of the demographics of the local area that would point to that being of particular benefit to that local community. So that's something we're really desperately keen to see embedded and used much more obviously as part of the decision making. But still, to the point we made earlier, I think it will take us so far, and then having that local context, because the data knows what's there today, it doesn't always understand some of the wider future potential.
And one very final question, quick question: is that ever reviewed? So you've more or less got a matrix of priorities. Is that ever reviewed?
Yeah, I mean, it would be absolutely, because things change. So, understanding as things change, that as that context changes, that's, timetable changes will mean certain stations have, bigger or lesser impact on wider connectivity. So it's actually really important that that list is not fixed ad infinitum, because the context changes.
If I just add on the cost aspect as well, that you mentioned around, do we use the data and look at it, but also almost actively look at what the cost of these schemes are. So one of the things that we've done under the Portfolio Sponsorship Office is we recognise the benefit and the efficiency of standardisation when we go and change the infrastructure. It helps us, it helps the supply chain. We've introduced a series of what we call configurations. So actually when we go and we look at a site, we can see, is it 2 platforms and 2 lifts? And therefore, what does our data and experience tell us about what that project might cost and what its complexity may be? That means that much earlier in the project life cycle, we're able to engage with stakeholders around what that scheme is, what it would cost us, to investigate things like, are there other regeneration aspects around that may make it a more efficient delivery? So it's not just a lift and footbridge. We go and we make alterations to the station at the same time. So we're always trying to find those efficiencies, best practices, and introduce them as part of our business as usual delivery.
Thanks, Assembly Member Prince. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, both of you. I just want to circle back to Assembly Member Prince's original question about the competitive bidding process being described by the Chief Exec of Transport for All as time-consuming and inefficient. And I think that's partly just every railway station should be accessible for everybody to be able to independently get on and off a train and in and out of the station. And so I think that the statement that was made was kind of a call to try and just get on with delivering more accessible stations. And I just wondered if either of you could just speak to that just for a moment, just in terms of, just the time, it's extraordinary that there are so many people living in our city who are prevented from getting onto the transport system to access employment, healthcare, you know, the shops, whatever it is, because there isn't a lift at their station. And so just that, it just seems wrong that you're pitting one community against another community just because their station happens to be in a pocket of isolation, which is some of the wording that was used earlier. I don't know who wants to go first.
So I recognise, I think Caroline Stickland has made that comment, including in things like the Transport Select Committee inquiry that was held last year. And I don't think anybody would disagree that the ambition which Transport for All has, which we all share, is that every single station in the country should be accessible to everybody. We're just not in a position from a funding standpoint to make that a reality overnight. So that sort of what Caroline has described as the competition element, which we, and you could say this is just picking words, that nomination process is to try and make the best possible decision about where to spend that access for all money, when we unfortunately do have to make some choices until we're at the point where we've achieved that long-term goal.
I think we're coming on to looking at the money later, so I don't want to tread on other people's questions. But Kaylee, did you just want to come back on that as well?
Yeah, so I think nationally we are at around 54% step-free stations, and within London I think it's 42%. So nationally we came out of change control period 6 with 66 schemes still ongoing, of which 38 are in delivery now, and the 27 are still going through design development and those funding commitments. In terms of the Greater London area, I think we've had 82 schemes since around 2006. 68 are complete and a further 14 are ongoing. So, as a business, we recognise we're absolutely committed to continuing to improve accessibility. But those are just some numbers around what we've done over the last 8 years in terms of delivery. But still much more to be done and continue.
So my main question is about stakeholder engagement, and sort of wanting to know what forms of stakeholder engagement are undertaken when you're planning, designing and delivering access for all improvements at a station.
If I start and then you add certainly anything that I've missed. So we obviously work with the train operating companies very closely. They know the service, the passengers, and what it means in terms of running on the infrastructure. We also engage through those, as I said, disability impact assessments and our super users in terms of how we're considering accessibility and what the scope of these schemes should be. Our internal Network Rail panel that we talked about is BEEPS, that's the Built Environment Accessibility Panel, as well as the DFT panel that we talked about, which is DIPTAC. We also work with local disability review groups, local authorities. South Eastern, I know, have got their own TOC disability board, so the operators also engage on this as well. We obviously work with TfL, for example, on that regular engagement. So we have engagement that takes place nationally. A lot of it in terms of the project and schemes is done more locally. So that would be our Network Rail teams engaging with some of those that I talked about in terms of local authorities, local user groups.
And are the people with lived experience who are contributing, are they paid and remunerated for the time that they give to this?
So Network Rail certainly pays for the advice that it takes from disabled people, particularly to our BEEP panel. That's a paid and remunerated panel. We also employ access consultants who are registered under the National Register of Accessibility Consultants. So we will obviously pay for that expertise as well.
And the super users, what are super users? Are they people who travel a lot or with lived experience of disability or what's a super user?
So the super users are those that have been through particular training. So in terms of those 9 protected characteristics are within the business, they're considered our go-to people, both in terms of their experience, but also knowledge of standards, legislation, just to ensure that we've been through that check and challenge in the process. But there's aspects of specialist training internally to do that role.
If I supplement on that, we use Network Rail has very large, what we call our can-do network, which kind of it's employees in our business who represent the 9 protected characteristics, and they are often used as that expert reviewer or super user. The really important point is the reviewer is an independent to the project team, so we've got an independent review being done by people with relevant lived experience as well as the relevant technical experience.
Okay, so you're not marking your own homework?
No.
Yeah. And at what stage of the process are the stakeholders brought in to give their opinion on the access rule work that's being delivered at a station? Are they in there right at the beginning during the whole process of identifying which station is next, and then all the way through, or how does that work?
Well, so sorry, Kaylee's, so that nomination process, a part of the requirement is that there's been engagement locally. So that happens, right from the start of the process, and then in terms of the engagement or involvement once a scheme is in or has been nominated, and we're starting to look at the design of that scheme, that involves, there's a requirement. We'll start a diversity impact assessment process right at that early stage.
Yeah.
I mean, we've not always done that. I think that's been acknowledged, and so we did some work and I've released a new standard around diversity impact assessment, which from a Network Rail standpoint now strengthens that requirement and requires it as part of our PACE process, which I'm not going to need to refer to Kaylee what that stands for, but that's the process, that's the sort of governance framework that manages projects right through their life cycle, and that standard now requires that DIA to be started right at that design stage, because otherwise what you're doing is taking a design too late, at which point the decisions are already difficult to change. So we've acknowledged that and done some work to make that
and does that feel like it's working?
I would say it feels like it's working. I think there's always, room to improve, but I think it's definitely, we've seen a step change in the number of DIAs that we're seeing come through at that earlier stage in the process.
Yeah. So although we don't want to be overly process heavy, as Alison said, our project life cycle now has certain products, checks, panels. Those are all part of that design and development stage. So we're getting the engagement in what's the scope of the project, what are we delivering, as opposed to it being something that we engage with much later on in the process. Mm-hmm. It's really about informing and shaping the scheme at the right stage, but they are hardwired into the governance of thou shalt not pass beyond a project stage, again as part of reinforcing that as to we have to go and seek that advice, guidance and check at the right stage in the project, which is as early as possible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just before we move on from this sort of second section about the decision-making and the planning process, I think that this has been a really big part of our investigation so far, is how these decisions are made. So it's really interesting hearing you describe what, well, to be honest, it sounds like it is a bit of an odd process, isn't it? And it has a lot of sort of political oversight and involvement, which maybe we haven't seen elsewhere, which has its good points and bad points. But two of the things that have really strongly come out through our investigation so far is this question of engagement, about when it happens. So I wonder, is the diversity impact assessment standard, is that something that you could share with us so we can have a look at how you do it? Because one of the things that we're looking at is when this engagement is, so that would be So that would be great. And another aspect that's coming out very strongly is the use of data. Assemblyman Bakari has already sort of asked about how this footfall, how, you know, is this the only thing you look at? What else is you look at? Can I ask about the data used? Is that disaggregated in different ways? Obviously, you've talked about disabled people in the area, but do you also look at sort of the disaggregate it for women and age? Because obviously, if a station is more accessible, it is going to be more accessible also for older people in general, for women. How can you give us some information on the details of that data, either now or is that something you could follow up on?
So part of the standard around diversity impact assessment and the guidance that's issued for how to complete that requires that local disaggregation to be done on the local population. Yes. So that's absolutely part and parcel of that process, and it isn't just disability that's assessed or the impact on disabled people that's assessed. It's all of those 9 protected characteristics under the Equalities Act, and obviously it's really important because there's, you know, you can be disabled and a woman, you can be disabled and old, you can be, so that intersectionality point is really vital. And ultimately what you're doing is you're saying the best possible thing we can do is put in solutions that work for everybody. So that's a really important point for us. But yeah, that guidance is issued. The work we've been doing in terms of the use we've been making and the analysis and the modelling that we've been doing using the audit data, at this point that's taken slightly more aggregated data around the population. So yeah, it needs to marry up with then sort of slightly more detailed local segmentation of the...
I suppose that's the difficulty between footfall now and what it could be when you change station. But if any information you could give on that that you're able to share would be really useful for us to sort of look at different ways of doing this. Thanks very much. And now for Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. And I want to ask about the delay, the inordinate delay, I would say, in actually providing access to a lot of the stations you've already announced. Now, I represent Enfield and Haringey, so I was delighted in 2014 when 3 of my stations were awarded access for all funding. A decade later, none of them have been delivered. So Palmer's Green in Enfield is the 2nd highest footfall in the borough. Alexandra Palace in Haringey is actually an interchange. You know, you can access trains to central London, but also up to Peterborough, Cambridge, Stevenage, Hertford, and Welwyn Garden City. There currently, residents have to go into Finsbury Park or central London to get those trains, and it costs more. And Seven Sisters was awarded funding in 2014, which is, again, an interchange with TfL, but also the main station if you're visiting Spurs. And even if you're perfectly able to take care of yourself and move around, it's a hostile environment on match days. And, you know, I dread to think what it's like if you're in a wheelchair or you have some other impairments. And in fact, Seven Sisters was re-announced in 2019. Now, the latest data we have, well, and I've been following this for the last decade and raising it regularly, and I keep getting updates from Network Rail, but those promises always seem to come to nothing. Last year, when I raised this, I was told that for Palmer's Green, the outline design had been done, work would start at the end of last year, and it would be open this mid-24. For Alexandra Palace, you've completed the outline design. You're about to appoint an external contractor, and you would start enabling works late last year, construction this year, and open in spring next year. None of that has happened. And despite Seven Sisters being re-announced in 2019, again, nothing seems to have happened. So why is that?
If I take this question, so I think in the opening question I talked about the independent reviews that we'd been through over the last 18 months around the Access for All programme, recognising some of those delays that you talk about, not just with those schemes but with that wider 66 that we didn't complete through change control period 6. We know that COVID, unfortunately, was a time that slowed us down. We also, off the back of that period, had a lot of inflationary pressure, particularly around things like materials, the cost of those materials, and also the supply chain costs. That's meant that as a number of those schemes have come through design and been through that supply chain pricing, what we've ended up with is in some instances costs that are not affordable or don't represent the best value for money and for taxpayers. I certainly know at least 2 of those schemes that you mention have been under significant what we call minimum viable product review. Which is about how do we get the scope right and how do we get the cost of those schemes right whilst remaining committed to their delivery. Now, what that does mean is sometimes we have to go back project stages, which can be hugely frustrating. I recognise that in terms of those people that are waiting for the solutions. But it is with a focus of how do we deliver the best product for taxpayers. The other thing that I would add around those reviews and that performance that we recognise is unsatisfactory is that's all informing the recovery and the reform work that we're doing around the Access for All portfolio, which is very focused on how do we now, for those schemes that are still to be delivered, and also those 50 that have been announced for feasibility, how do we go and do them faster? So you're seeing a much shorter time between us announcing them and them being in place for passengers, as well as how do we look at the solutions that we're delivering? So I talked about the standardisation approach of some of those solutions, but also about the types of footbridges and how we greener and more carbon efficient in what we're delivering. So there's multiple strands to that reform work that are about how do we deliver faster, how do we deliver for less for our taxpayers, but also how do we deliver greener and with less carbon. So in summary, I absolutely recognise the challenges and the frustrations. It's been a very intense period of time in the business in terms of how we go through that independent review, but also how do we inform and shape those reform measures going forwards.
Yeah, I mean, you know, these were announced in 2014. Those cost pressures necessarily wouldn't be there if, you know, that had got on and delivered them as they should have done. I just want you to ask as well, you're announcing new stations, and yet you've got these other stations, such as My3, that presumably were prioritised then because the data supported that. They are the ones that the local authority, local communities believe are the ones where they're more needed. In a sense, you're announcing a new tranche of stations that are less priority, yet you don't seem to be necessarily prioritising the ones that have already been granted. Can you assure me that you are prioritising those?
So we're working with the department on that commitment to continue to deliver those CP6 schemes. So that's 66 that I mentioned, of which the 38 are in delivery. We're still going through the funding and the governance process on those that remain, but remain committed to them as do the DFT. However, they're obviously subject to that continued development and governance with the DFT, who's ultimately the funder of the schemes. The change that we've seen for Change Control Period 7 around the announcement recognises some of the challenges that we've had through the previous Change Control Period. And I say that on they have been announced for feasibility because we recognise that, again, it's very important that we go and do the depth of the feasibility, the design and the development work, so we're much better informed going into delivery, and we see less of what we've had with a number of those schemes that you mentioned, which is we've had to go back and revisit. So it's really about how do we get the depth and the development there up front. So when we're making the commitment to stakeholders, we hold our programme for delivery and we hold our costs for delivery as well. So we are seeing a different approach as we go into the next 5 years. Is there anything that you'd add, Alison?
Can I ask? I mean, for example, Palmer's Green. You know, the design work was only done last year and only went into planning, and only got planning. You know, so I think the fact that you're doing, I think the design work comes many years after it's been announced, so it doesn't seem you're giving it the urgency that it requires. But could you write to me with regards to those three and give me a detailed update and when we can expect those? That would be really helpful. So you've talked about what you're doing in future. Can I ask, when you're looking at improving the station for accessibility purposes, do you look at other issues such as safety? So if I take, for example, Seven Sisters, it's a joint station with TfL and Network Rail station, but actually the Network Rail entrance on Seven Sisters Road is sort of, part of it's owned by Network Rail, part of it's by Transport for London. It seems to be a no man's land where no one wants to take responsibility for the feel of it and the look of it, and local residents are continually saying it doesn't feel safe. And are you able to look at that when you do this work, about how you can improve the look, the feel and the ambience of it as well?
So without being specific to the station, our processes in terms of when we go and make interventions to existing infrastructure, we have to consider other aspects as well. It's one of the things that can actually make the delivery quite complex, because we're going and interacting with that existing infrastructure where it is older, where it may not be up to standard, but we do have to consider fire strategy, safety and security, as well as when we scope the Access for All schemes, obviously things like the Code of Practice for Accessibility, which is a DFT Code of Practice.
We'll have some questions on that shortly, I think.
Okay.
But I think
it does pick up on those wider aspects as well, yes.
Okay, because it looks derelict at the moment, and it's not nice. I think, Alison, you were going to add something a little earlier.
Was I going to add something? Well, I was going to just say, yes, absolutely, the opportunity to look at improving safety, and everyone getting home safe every day is almost, and has been for a long time, Network Rail's overarching and principal value. So yes, absolutely improving safety, and I think acknowledging that safety isn't just about slips, trips and falls inside the station. It's about understanding that that wider environment. I think one thing we do sometimes get challenged with, I'm not saying that's true of TfL, by the way, but you quite often see this concept called the red line boundaries around a station, like that, and I think there's lots of opportunity to work a bit harder with local stakeholders, including as part of the nominations process, actually, where you've got a lot of engagement around the choice of schemes. I think, having some of those red lines being slightly less hard, which means, Network Rail takes it to this certain point, and then, the land or the responsibility sits with the local council. I think that's a sort of shared frustration that we have.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garrett. Garrett.
In between. So thinking about... there was.
Apologies, that is my fault. Assemblymember Tarr had a follow-up question.
Thank you. This is the second time you've done this to me,
It is the
Chair.
second time I've done this to you.
I mean, Assemblymember Garrett forgot my name at the last meeting. I've been skipped over. I'm clearly having a good impact here at the Assembly because I just keep getting forgotten about. So, exactly. I have a forgetful face. So, Shortland Station in my constituency received its funding for the access rule funding to build the lifts in December 2014. But the actual building of the lifts only began this year. Can we get a bit more detail on what, in fact? So can we get a bit more detail on what Networks Delta is doing to speed up the delivery of these projects?
Shortlands, I have as due for completion in spring next year is the current date. In terms of what we're doing to speed up the delivery as a business, one of the things that I'm responsible for with the Portfolio Sponsorship Office is what we call better value footbridges. It's not just focused on cost. So we're also looking at, as I said earlier, how do we go out and deliver these schemes much quicker? A big element of that is the standardisation that I refer to. It's also about, through that design and development process, how do we benchmark ourselves? Now, what that means is how do we look at other similar schemes that have been completed to ensure that our programmes are robust, that our costs are robust in terms of going and undertaking that delivery. So we have the better value footbridges work stream, which is part of that, but we also, just in terms of implementing that Portfolio Sponsorship Office, was a recognition by the business that this delivery hasn't gone as well as it should have done for our passengers, and we continue to make that commitment as to how do we go and deliver better and faster for passengers.
Thank you for that answer. I live in the Beckingham and Penge constituency, which, as a parliamentary constituency, has the most train stations of any in London, if not the UK. But the majority of these stations just aren't accessible to the majority. Yet in the last 10 years, Shortlands is the only station that's received funding, and I know that South Eastern's recent bid, or Network Rail's recent, in the most recent bid, that no stations across all of Bromley were successful in funding. We have stations like Kent House, where a lot of trains are terminated and turned around sent the other way, and we get people stranded there. So this is a station. In fact, one local Beckingham resident has described the increasing situation as they've said that as a disabled Londoner, they feel like they're being built out of the city, which I think is really a statement that says why this investigation is so important. So, thinking of the access for all funding, do you feel that the programme is actually moving fast enough and that enough stations are being brought into the 21st century?
Our recognition of the performance through the last change control period would say we recognise we're not delivering fast enough, and we've not delivered on the commitments that we made. But we continue to be committed to improving that. Obviously, the department has made the commitment in terms of the further 50 that they've announced. I recognise the disappointment that doesn't bring in funding for your stations. We also, although Access for All is the portfolio that I'm responsible for, there are other funding opportunities and other parts of the business where we go and we make accessibility improvements to the infrastructure as well. So it's not just about Access for All. My focus within the business is about how do we make the Access for All portfolio as efficient as possible so that we're able to go and utilise the funding that's made available to us. It has to be our mission to go and deliver as much as we can in terms of making the infrastructure accessible.
Thank you for that. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, and apologies again, Assemblymember Tyrrell. It's my system for noting down follow-up questions, which I will review before the next meeting. Assemblymember Garrett.
Thanks. So thinking about the transition really from period 6 into period 7, so just for those who aren't completely up to speed, so period 6 was 2019 to 24, and then period 7 is 24 to 29. So Network Rail board minutes from May 24 said that the Access for All programme significantly underperformed in period 6, which created challenges then for the transition into period 7. So I just wonder if you could explain what impact that's having on period 7 and what measures are being taken to mitigate the impact of that, the problems in period 6.
So as we came out of change control period 6, I referenced earlier 66 schemes that hadn't been completed. When we went into that change control period, we had 111 schemes to deliver. So although we did achieve a number in the period, we did not complete all of those that were named for change control period 6. So what we've been through with the department and ahead of change control period 7 is to understand what of the change control period 7 funding we will require to complete those 66 before we're also considering those 50 that are named for feasibility through change control period 7. So completing that work bank from change control period 6 is a significant draw on the funding. It has to be a priority for us to go and complete those sites. That's also part of why we're undertaking the feasibility work, so that as we move towards the later years in change control period 7, we can think about what the Access for All portfolio delivery looks like in terms of the programme through years 3, 4 and 5, given that we complete those 66. Currently they're planned through years 1 and 2 of change control period 7.
So presumably overall that means some of the things that might have got done in 7 won't be because of effectively the kind of, what would you call it, the overflow from 6 into 7?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, and so when will we know, sort of year 2, which is what, 2026-ish, is that when we'll know where the clearing of the backlog sits and therefore what's likely to get done in the back half of period 7?
So the programme to complete those 66 is there. That's what takes us through year 1 and 2, slightly into year 3 for some of those schemes nationally. We're already working with the department on what that portfolio of 50 or however many we take beyond feasibility would look like. My expectation is that probably summer next year we would have a better view as to what that looks like as a programme, albeit we may not, I expect at that point we wouldn't be able to confirm exactly which stations because we'd still be in very early feasibility and development.
Okay, so 2025, a rough idea, 2026, presumably a clearer idea, because by that point you either will have substantially cleared the backlog or you'll be aware that you haven't and therefore that's continuing.
Yes.
Okay. From those same board minutes mentioned that regional access for all delivery reform would be required because of that underperformance. What would that mean for London?
So within Network Rail we have 5 regions. My portfolio sponsorship office reports into an executive sponsor who's Rob Cairns. He's the regional managing director for Wales and Western, but he takes executive leadership team oversight of the portfolio. Those 5 regions, so I'm trying to think which ones will feed into London. You have Southern, you have Wales and Western, you have North Western, Central and Eastern that all touch on those London boroughs. Each of those regions, as part of the reform piece, has a regional lead. So they take overall accountability and oversight for the number of schemes that sit within their area. What my team as a national oversight then do is take the bigger picture again, but really we're focused on those individual regions hold their responsibility for delivery of those schemes, and at a national level we're looking for best practice, lessons learned, knowledge sharing, but again thinking about how are we efficient either in the delivery or the solutions that we adopt to them. So there's much more visibility and oversight within the business at executive level as to what's happening with the programme as part of that reform piece.
Okay, just looking further back, right back to the beginning. I think overall, is it 57 stations in London have had one or more lifts as part of Access for All over that period. It's not a quiz, but that's what it's something like that. Let's say something like 57. Over that whole period, presumably, you've sort of touched on this already, that you learn lessons, you understand efficiencies of scale and so on. So over that, it's about 20 years, I suppose, that's been running. Are lifts now being delivered faster and more efficiently and more successfully and more cheaply than they were? Are we seeing improvements across those aspects over that period?
I couldn't comment on the specifics over that period on lifts. What I would say is lifts continue to be something that we're looking at under the Better Value Footbridges work stream. We recognise that nationally that's an efficiency opportunity for us. I say that in terms of both our standards and what that means we can access in the market with the supply chain, and how do we not constrain some of that, but also thinking about how we use new and different technologies which may also be more cost effective and more reliable for our passengers, importantly.
I mean, those are the questions that I sort of imagined that you would look at, but you don't have a sense of, over the 20 years that you've been doing it, these are the ways in which you've got better at it. Obviously there's been inflation over those 20 years, so you wouldn't necessarily expect it to be lower in cash terms, maybe in real terms, but have you got, quicker at understanding how these things can be deployed and actually getting the lifts in, turning the project around quicker? Is that? Because I suppose what you've just told me is it's an aspiration to do it. I suppose my question is, over 20 years, is it happening?
Sorry, my hesitation is my experience of the portfolio has been quite recent.
Okay.
I would be happy to follow up on something that tells you about what our experience and data shows us over those 20 years in terms of efficiency of delivery, but also efficiency of operation of the solution, if that's useful.
I'd be interested to hear that. Thanks very much.
I think I just offer an observation that over the course of the 4 control periods, or the 20 years that Access for All has been running, a combination of things has been happening. I think we're pretty good at delivering what you might call those slightly simpler schemes, which I realise is a very obvious thing to say, but when Access for All was first envisaged, it was probably tackling, slightly more straightforward or simple schemes. I think as time has gone on, while we've gotten more efficient at delivering those more straightforward schemes, the stations that we're trying to tackle now are just simply more complex with some of the environmental constraints that factor. So the challenge has changed. So we need to evolve to try and better meet that challenge. There's some quite interesting innovation that's been done on lift and footbridge. There's a new lift design that's being looked at, which would allow you to much more quickly install lifts in combination with the footbridge. It takes a lot less possession time on the network, requires a lot less deep foundation work. So I think, as some of that bridge and lift innovation, we're going to put one in a site in Greater Anglia and start to truly sort of test and understand how we might deploy some of that. Because, it's, as some of these sites get more complex, we need to find different solutions that will allow us to continue to make those complex sites more accessible. And also just to offer, I think there's a real focus on lift performance in Network Rail, so that's a clear priority in CP7, both from a very targeted renewals programme, plus also we've let a new contract from a maintenance standpoint, which is increasing the SLAs, which we expect from lifts. We're going to change the focus of those metrics to be more customer focused. So we're, while it wouldn't be apparent from some of the press that we see on lifts, actual lift performance on average is about 98.2% across the network, but that sort of tends to disguise poorer performing lifts, which are always the ones much more heavily utilised in our busiest stations. So there's going to be more spares invested to support performance of those busier lifts, and the metrics and measurements which we'll be publishing and be more transparent about are going to be more kind of passenger focused.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. I'd be happy for you to send us that data as well, with the Chair's permission, particularly because, I mean, my view would be that a lift that is broken is worse than a lift that doesn't exist, because somebody might turn up to try to use a lift thinking that it works, and then
agree.
you know, their journey is blocked.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember McCartney.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I'm aware that Transport for the North is asking for devolution of the Access for All funding to its Rail North Partnership Agreement. Cass, what are your thoughts about perhaps devolving this funding to Transport for London? And if not wholly, about having those stronger links? And I'm thinking, for example, of Seven Sisters Station, where we know that hopefully you're going to be making the Network Rail side of it accessible, but it's also one where Transport for London want. When you have those sort of stations, do you look at what you can do about working together and making sure that you get a full accessible station at that point?
So, have we thought about the opportunity to devolve access for? I mean, ultimately that is a DfT decision, but we just heard Peter Hendy in the House of Lords last week talk about the fact this is a pro-devolution government. Accessibility in general is a reserved matter for UK Parliament, but that does not mean by any stretch that there isn't very strong and devolved agreements with Scotland, you know, and I think with some of the increased powers which, under this new government, they'll give to mayoral combined authorities, I absolutely think, you know, looking at how we best distribute that kind of funding opportunity, I think that will be absolutely in the mix for future reform.
Yeah, and as we look through those later years in the control period and what Access for All becomes, I know that devolution, further devolution is definitely a consideration. What we need to balance that with as a business is where are we centrally or nationally more efficient. So some of those challenges that we've had through previous change control periods, what we don't want to do is lose that national oversight, knowledge sharing, learning in how we go and do these schemes. But absolutely we recognise and encourage that, you know, having decisions in the right place with the right people is what we should be doing under devolution.
Thank you. And Chair, it might be helpful if you could write to us to say how you have engaged with Transport for London, perhaps where you have joint stations or interchanges. That would be really helpful.
Yeah, that would be really helpful.
I mean, one opportunity we are aware of, and we will be working with TfL on, is they've announced plans to relook at some of the 20 biggest interchange stations and consider priorities for improvement there. So we'll be going in January to a sort of quarterly joint strategic planning forum that takes place between TfL and Network Rail, which will be, you know, our opportunity to start to work with TfL on feeding into that particular programme of improvement. So
that sounds really positive. Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you. And we are moving on to think about customer experience at stations. So my questions are for you, Alison. And we've heard sort of in the course of this investigation in previous meetings, we've heard a lot from people about the experience of trying to travel independently, boarding and getting on and off trains at stations. With, you know, whether for people who use wheelchairs, people who are blind, you know, everyone's dealing with different issues to achieve that independent access to travelling. So I think my first question to you broadly as an opener is, what is Network Rail doing to ensure disabled passengers receive a consistent, good experience when engaging with station staff?
So if I talk about Network Rail in its capacity as the station facility operator of the managed stations, which are the big terminus stations in London. So we deliver and are responsible for, if I talk about assistance provision, we do about 5 of, we are sort of solely responsible for the delivery of assistance at about 4 of those stations, and the rest of the stations in London are delivered by, or the assistance provision is delivered by the train operating companies. So what we're doing in combination with our train operating colleagues is we've got, so we rolled out in the last 2 years, we've trained, actually not just frontline teams, but actually all of Network Rail's staff have been taken through quite intensive training around disability and awareness training, and we've got extra training that we deliver to our frontline teams. That's all delivered, that was designed by and delivered by disabled people. So that's a big area of focus over the last couple of years, continues to be a big area of focus, and we're working now with colleagues in the train companies to look at the next sort of refresh point, because we refresh that every 2 years in accordance with our accessible travel policy. So we're working now on looking at how we might make some of that training slightly more standard across different operators. We all have the same learning objectives set by the ORR. That's actually set through the accessible travel policy guidance. So we are consistent insofar as the learning outcomes our training addresses, but in terms of the sort of content that we use and how that's been developed, we're looking at opportunities to make that more consistent. We're also, we as Network Rail have taken the lead, but are now extending that opportunity to, again, all of the train companies, because we're recognising, certainly for things like passenger assistance, we deliver one leg of a multi-leg journey, and every single assistance Network Rail delivers is, joins on to assistance that's then picked up by another train operating company, because obviously we only manage the station side of it. So we're creating a competency around passenger assist. So very focused on training, on passenger assist in particular. So that's some of the things we'll be doing looking forward. We are doing a lot around information at stations. We have obviously got very big, complex stations which can present quite unique navigation and wayfinding challenges. So we have a new wayfinding standard which is progressively going to get rolled out across the managed stations. We're investing in, we've got BSL information now in all of our managed stations, and we're progressively putting that onto the CIS screens as well. We've released we're working with a company called Good Maps to deliver, particularly for people who are blind or have sight loss, navigation and wayfinding. So we scanned, detailed scans of all our stations. That feeds into a wayfinding and navigation app, which supports particularly those who have sight loss, total or partial sight loss. So it's really important. We now, one of the things which we and the whole industry has been challenged by is, so it's both a good thing. We've actually already this year surpassed the number of assistances we've provided in our managed stations compared to a full year last year. So demand is actually up about 60% on passenger assist. That's almost equally split between booked and turn up and go. But we're very focused on the fact not all of those assistances are being successfully delivered. So hand in hand with the training and in conjunction with colleagues in RDG and across the train companies, we're focused on the causes of those, the most significant causes of those failures, to look at opportunities for improving. And that's covering a range of things from revisiting our resourcing plans, understanding the contribution that's being made by poorer performing infrastructure. So when the lift is out, a customer may miss their passenger assist time. The wider performance on the network, which has obviously been very challenging, can mean that customers simply aren't able to make the time. or the particular journey that they were planning to make. So we're doing a lot in that. We were delighted to hear Peter Hendy announce last week that we've had funding now released to improve the tools that support customers booking assistance or turning up and go. And one big thing that brings is the opportunity to strengthen the communication capability between customers and the staff members who are assisting them. So that will be one of the things that we get delivered as part of the roadmap of improvements that we just had the funding announced for.
That sounds all incredibly helpful. It sounds like you are aware and alert to the things that we heard loud and clear in our previous meetings about how very often people have a really good experience with Customer Assist, and then the next time it goes completely wrong, no one turns up, and you're left at an unfamiliar station, and and that is, can be completely undermining to your confidence and everything else. And
hugely.
And is, we kind of obviously need to make sure that those connections work. And also it's good that you're clearly looking into the fact that the trains don't run quite right.
Yes.
But also people can sometimes miss a train. There was the example of Tanny Gray-Thompson, who missed a train, caught the next train, and then there wasn't anyone to help her off the train when she arrived and ended up crawling off the train. That is... It's just not okay, and we. So I think sort of that extra money. Do you know what the timescale is before you've got this new capability to improve the communication and everything?
Well, so a lot of work has been done already on preparing for even just submitting the funding bid, and the team at RDG, who will in particular be responsible for delivering that capability change insofar as at least the technology platform, they are ready and eager to get started on it. The communication improvements are one of the first things they plan to do on that roadmap, and I think the whole roadmap's planning to take about 2 years, 2.5 years to get fully delivered. But that communication aspect of it, which we've been keen to do for quite a long time now, is one of the first things that we'll do. That does go hand in hand with making sure all the staff, Network Rail's rolled out, if you like, the staff app element of that, and then I think there are some gaps across some of the other train companies, but that goes hand in hand as getting that staff app rolled out more comprehensively.
Which gives them the tools to be able to give a better service, hopefully. Just one more question, which is that there are many stations on the network that don't have any staff or don't have any staff at particular times of day. So how are disabled passengers supported at those stations when there just aren't any staff there to help?
Well, the default policy is that we would taxi customers to their nearest accessible station from which they can then complete their journey. That's a sort of default industry policy. And what we need to do is strengthen the information provision that allows people to understand where those arrangements are or what those arrangements are, and not turn up without understanding before they've started that journey that there isn't a member of staff potentially available to
how does that work? If your nearest station is a station that is unstaffed, how do you get that taxi to take you to the nearest station that is staffed?
So it's not an issue for Network Rail per se, because our stations we don't have that issue, and each train company will have potentially some of their own peculiar arrangements on how that works, but that would be the responsibility of the train company.
Okay, and so it's down to the train companies to communicate, and that's what people are relying on. It's that feels like it's a weak link. But I'll hand back to you, Chair.
It's definitely an opportunity for improvement. I mean, one thing I am aware of, which is being looked at by some of the train companies, particularly around the South East, actually, is looking at this concept of mobile assistance teams that can be deployed to they're not supporting a fixed location. They're able to support some of those unstaffed locations. So I think that's, I think that's an opportunity that needs to be properly explored. It will throw up some of its own challenges, but certainly as an opportunity, I think that's something we'll spend a bit more time looking at.
Thanks. Yes, and I definitely do think that's an opportunity that we might be able to hopefully explore as things change on rail. And if you don't mind, before I hand over to Assemblymember Garrett for the next question, can I welcome students from Christchurch Primary School in Redbridge to the public gallery? Thank you for joining us. We're talking today about accessibility on railway, so how we're helping people get around when they're disabled. I hope this is of interest to you. And over to Assemblymember Garrett.
Hello. I love that phrase, opportunity for improvement. It's a great way of putting it. So here's another opportunity for improvement. So my understanding, Kayleigh, is that the Access for All main programme is about getting people from the street onto the platform, which is excellent for rail enthusiasts who want to go to the platform and look at a train. But most people want to then get on the train, so there's an opportunity for improvement there. Could the programme be expanded to get people from the street all the way onto the train?
So I think what you're talking about is step-free access or level boarding,
yes.
Which we've obviously seen with the introduction of Crossrail through the central operating section, which has been fantastic. I may ask Alison to support me on this. The difficulty with the step-free access or level boarding on the existing infrastructure is about the different types of rolling stock that are out there on the network. So what we typically find is whilst we can provide for one type of rolling stock, that may then be to the detriment of others. So in our assessment of step-free, we need to be mindful as to what is the predominant rolling stock that utilises that station and platform. Are there any changes planned for the rolling stock type, so that what we don't do is introduce a further hazard or risk to our passengers. I think in terms of GBRTT and where we go with bringing track and train together. Alison, you might want to talk more about the opportunity that brings in terms of how we consider the two things.
So one thing that I think will be hugely helpful in this context is the government's commitment to developing a long-term rolling stock strategy, and already what is being introduced wherever possible, which is what we, I think, in technical terms would call low-floor trains, which mean the train and a standard platform height are capable of achieving that level boarding. So as we're procuring and starting to procure again more rolling stock, particularly for regional and local networks, we can introduce newer modern rolling stock, which will give us that low floor capability. And wherever we have the opportunity to streamline the number of different types of rolling stock that's being introduced onto particular lines of route, which picks up on Kayleigh's point, mixed use rolling stock onto the same platform is a very difficult challenge to overcome from a level boarding standpoint. But nonetheless, with things like a 10-year rolling stock strategy, I think one of the opportunities that will be fully explored is how do we use that as an opportunity to, standardise the kind of stock we're buying. So we've got in regional and local networks in particular the opportunity where we can to introduce that. And then, it starts to make the task of thinking about platform adjustments a little easier. High-speed stock's very difficult to do because basically to get the speed, you need big bits of kit under the train, which unfortunately means very difficult to introduce level boarding unless it's like in HS2's case, they'll have dedicated stations. But they will also typically, so they will be we'll tend to need to still rely on staff to support customers onto the train in that case. But certainly bringing together the track and the train and the decision making, things like a long-term rolling stock strategy, which we've not had for, I don't know when the last time we had a long-term rolling stock strategy, with central oversight over that, rather than it's always been under the franchising model, the responsibility of the incoming operator to position what future rolling stock investment they want to make. That's
great, but you can appreciate, let's imagine I get an email from one of my residents saying, I get on the train at, say, Hackbridge, which is a station in my constituency that has quite a big gap. Clapham Junction, not my constituency, but is notorious for having big gaps. And I say to them, good news, there's going to be, not yet, going to be a long-term rolling stock strategy. So if you continue to live in the same place and make the same journey, maybe 15 years from now you'll have level boarding. They might not jump for joy at that. Obviously, one of the interim measures are those, I forget the name of them, they're sort of humps on the platforms, which can, not all the way along the platform. What are they called,
sorry? They're called Harrington humps. I don't know why, actually, but they're called Harrington humps.
The Harrington hump, obviously, that's a relatively low-cost intermediate measure that would, if it has a lifespan of, say, 10 years, gets us to our long-term plan, possibly. So is there a programme of those? Because obviously that would help, if you create 1 point on a platform where someone can board, that's better than no points on a platform. And it takes away some of this staffing requirement that we've just been hearing about as well, where you arrive at a platform and at a station and you can't get on or off. Is there a plan to identify where those could go in and how we could get more of them?
So I'm not aware that there's a wider scheme for those to be implemented as a standard, but as a significant number of stations. I know that we have introduced them. The challenge again with those can also come back to rolling stock. So what they do is they rely on what's the train stopping position and where are the doors sited on the platforms. So I am aware of cases where we've looked at, are they the right solution to introduce? But again, because you have multiple types of rolling stock, it may be a solution for where we've got a predominant type of rolling stock, but I'm not aware of it being looked at as a standalone programme. It does still offer some challenges, as I say.
I see. So the problem could be you put a Harrington hump in and it works for, say, 2/3 of the trains and not 1/3 of the trains.
Yes.
2/3 might be better than 0, though.
And that's where I say it really would be a case-by-case basis as to, is there a predominant type of rolling stock that's got the longevity where that's a solution that offers us a betterment. But in some cases, it would introduce a risk factor, or it could introduce a further challenge to a passenger where the expectation is that they can level board, but actually it's not the right type of train that turns up. Yeah.
Presumably those are very cheap, though, compared with a lift or compared with a new rolling stock programme. I don't know what a Harrington hump goes for off the shelf, but I'm assuming it's in the, low thousands, something like that, rather than billions?
It would be a cheaper solution than a bridge and lifts, yes.
Yes. And just in terms of rolling stock, I don't know, I've heard there's a challenge if you've got freight going through a station. Mm-hmm. Is that also an issue in terms of getting the platform height or a Harrington hump or something to align with the passenger services?
So that's not so much an issue with the... that's about the what we call the gauging. So that's the distance between the train and the platform itself. So what we have to do is have the rolling stock within a gauging envelope, which means in different scenarios there is not a risk of it coming into contact with the platform edge, the coping stones, which could happen. So again, you would assess for multiple types of rolling stock, and you would have to consider freight usage in the area as to whether that offers a different gauging envelope to consider.
So that might make it in practice not possible to have
it. It may make it in practice not possible. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Just to clarify, though, that there's two issues. There's the height, and there's also the gap.
Oh, sorry, I'm not sure your mic is on. I don't know.
Apologies.
There we go.
Yeah, I think the issue that Kaylee's describing is more about the problem that introduces is the gap between the door of the train and the edge of the platform. Harrington humps can help you where it's a height It's the height issue, but that doesn't really help you with the gauging or the
Yes,
the
you've got a
distance.
height so that it's level, but you've also got a width
gap.
so that even if
Yes.
it's in theory at the same height, if it's a 6-inch
Yes.
gap, that might prove difficult in practice.
Yeah, correct.
Exactly.
Understood. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And Assemblymember Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. And what you said earlier in your answer to Assemblymember Garrett sounds almost like music to my ears. You've referred, Kayleigh, to Crossrail and the step-free access that's been introduced in the central element of the new railway line. Alison, you talked about the different types of freight, and of course there is different types of railway, and of course on the Elizabeth line, primarily we have just one type of new train that's just been introduced. But there are still very many issues in terms of the gap between the platform and the trains, and I'm going to use Ealing Broadway as the example, as you'd expect me to. So just a few examples that we've had earlier this year. So Lucy Daramola, who was hospitalised after cutting her leg on the side of the train. She said, the main thing there is the gap is too high and the edge is quite sharp. So if you miss a step, the edge is quite dangerous as well. I fear that someone will die because I was actually unconscious, so it can happen to other people as well, even worse. And of course it has happened to other people. There was an 82-year-old Rolf Kern who wounded himself with a 2-inch gash beneath his knee after missing the step. He said it's the sheer fact that the step is 12 to 14 inches high, which I find for a modern new line unacceptable. Eric Leach, who said I was trying to get off, other people were trying to force their way on. I was terrified looking at the gap, lost my balance and came down and fell and broke a bone in my left foot and mashed up my right knee. I was on the ground for 20 minutes. But it's not just older people, and we've got the children here. We've had a 4-year-old girl who's fallen 4 times in 3 months due to the gap and was unable to walk for days after damaging her knee. Now, TfL have made a number of improvements at the station operationally and infrastructure-wise within the station to try and reduce the likelihood of these incidents happening again. But ultimately, it requires investment to raise at least part of the platform, as you said, with these humps. And you yourselves as Network Rail have stated it's a #1 priority. You've listened to the concerns of user groups and you've committed to review the situation and put forward proposals. So my question is very simple. It's been 6 months since these incidents have happened. When can we expect to see those proposals come forward?
I would have to take away the specific example and understand more about the commitment and the timings against that. I'm happy to do that for you following today. Ealing Broadway is a station that I know very well. I worked on Crossrail, so I recognise the challenges at that station and both with others. And I know we made huge improvements to those West London stations in terms of platform to street access and recognise the frustration that that's then not level boarding at those sites. I do know in the vicinity, but obviously a way off, we continue discussions with TfL about what's the right solution at Old Oak Common, for example, in terms of step-free access, recognising that HS2 network will be step-free as well. The difficulty in terms of those existing stations that I remember from Crossrail is about the different types of use of rolling stock and where that constrains us and in terms of adding a risk factor or a detrimental passenger experience that somebody has expected, they will be able to level board and they can't. I know at Ealing Broadway we work very closely with MTR in terms of providing ramps at that station for people to access as well. The other constraint that we obviously face around the existing infrastructure, not just the rolling stock types, is the amount of investment that it can take for us to rectify some of those platforms. So we do have to, unfortunately, consider that at some point. And really what we've seen through those major programmes, new stations, is that is a huge opportunity area for us in terms of the infrastructure to make sure that we get the solution right on day one, where it's new. But there is unfortunately a balance between existing infrastructure constraint and also the the financial implications as to what that solution would cost.
Yeah, and completely appreciate there's always going to be a financial envelope that you've got to work within. But when you've got a solution which is tried and tested elsewhere, those Harrington humps that you've raised literally earlier, was in terms of what we're looking for as the first step is to have a set of proposals that come forward as to what is the viable solution at that station. Funding is something, is the next step in terms of how we get there and so on and so forth. But actually, given that you're saying it's a priority, having that basic design, basic principles should be something that could be done and turn around relatively quickly.
It could be. It's the right thing for me to take that away and come back on the specifics of Ealing Broadway.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Kaylee. And certainly in terms of the improvements for step-free access across West London, it's majorly improved thanks to the investment. Those stations on the Elizabeth line, and I was delighted to have got Hanwell within that as well, because I think originally it wasn't going to get there as well. So in terms of the next question, over to yourself, Alison, it was just what are the findings of Great British Railways Transition Team's accessibility review of all stations across the country?
So, so you mean the particular station audit? So we, as I said, we have we've had possession of the data since October of last year. It's now living in and has been fully migrated into Network Rail's asset management system, which is a system called Citadel, and we have been working on three main areas. One is obviously how do we ensure that data set continues to be updated and maintained, which right now is the responsibility of the different station facility operators. I was thinking, what's the O stand for? So we've been working on and have now managed to confirm we've got all of that data up to date, because obviously at the point we got that data, there were some of the stations had been audited as far back as 2021. So we've been working through the summer to get that data set brought up to date, and we've just released we released an API of that data, so it now sits as publicly available in the Rail Data Marketplace. That was released back in I think it was April timeframe, and we've started to release information improvements from that data onto National Rail inquiries. So what the audit has told us, it's a phenomenal data set. It's about 95% of it almost is data that we have not collected or been able to sort of capture. It was very technical data, so incredibly technical asset type data, which is why we've taken a little bit of time to make sure that we've understood and extracted the value that we can get from it to support better information for customers. So we're now well underway getting what we think is valuable information from the audit out to customers, and we're continuing to work with RDG, who own the National Rail Inquiries website, to get as much of that information that we think is useful to customers available to customers to help them plan their journeys. That will feed directly into, so some of the funding that's been released as part of the passenger assist improvement will feed into accessible journey planning. So the journey planning tools that we offer will now be fully integrated, or will be in future fully integrated with that data set, so that we can offer an understanding to customers of exactly what or how accessible end-to-end journeys might be. In terms of what it's told us about the accessibility in general on the networks, told us a huge amount, and we've just released to the department a fairly substantial analysis of that data set, which I think I mentioned earlier on its own. It's just raw data, and it's so we've done quite a lot of work to situate and analyse that data set in the context of some of those wider contextual factors. So we're hoping the DFT is just kind of validating that report, and we're hoping that then can feed directly into upcoming spending reviews, for example, and how that might inform future longer term, well, short, medium and longer term investment. And what else can I say about it? Yeah, that's how we've been using that. And as I said, we've been releasing that data, analysed data through dashboards to all of the train companies, all the different parts of Network Rail. We're creating segmented views of that data that sort of specifically will look at, so we've given TFGM a view of their data to support how they're planning and taking forward their B network investment planning, and we're talking to TfL about similarly how can we offer them views into specifically the TfL stations, and that will feed directly into the review I mentioned, which we're aware they're starting to undertake on these 20 stations. So the data is public. We've done quite a lot of analysis and just released that report to the department. And yeah, we're hoping that starts to make its way into some of the investment planning that we're going to get the chance to do.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah. So what you're saying there is that you're turning that data into delivery, and it's painting a picture for the DFT, for TfL and others to where they should be focusing their efforts in terms of accessibility going forward, where those gaps are, where it's most deliverable, etc. Okay, great. And then finally, to both of you, what do you feel would be the impact of the move to Great British Railways and on work to improve accessibility and the Access for All programme?
So if I take that one to start with, and then if Kayleigh wanted to add anything in more specifically about the Access for All side of that, but the benefits in particular will be from that sort of more unified railway. So bringing together decisions around track and train, having, as a result of that, much better alignment in terms of priorities, aligned incentives, aligned budget and planning. Network Rail right now is budgeting over a 5-year period. The control period, train company budgets are set very differently at different time points, so that opportunity to bring together and make decisions jointly about the best possible outcome for customers can be frustrated by some of those barriers where we're just structurally not aligned or as aligned as we should be. I think the opportunity to introduce more common standards will be really important. The nature of the competitive franchising process has meant what we've done for all the right reasons has been to introduce different standards at different points in different parts of the network, which means ultimately from a customer standpoint they're experiencing quite different things at different parts of their journey. So that the benefit of that more unified approach, I think, is one of the main benefits. I mean, the passenger assist examples are a case in point where we've got, multiple different interfaces which customers have to navigate, and what that has meant too often is that customers are falling between the gaps, literally. So that unified railway approach, I think, will deliver significant benefits. And SGBR is a means to get going with that more quickly than the legislation to set GBR more fully up. So we're very excited by that.
I would echo everything that Alison said in terms of how do we consolidate and streamline standards process so there's not two, there's one for us to go through. We have very good engagement with TfL, as with other operators, around some of these schemes, but how do we get the benefit of both the track and train knowledge, and how do we streamline those two things would be key for me in terms of a benefit.
Thank you. Assemblymember, we are running over. Thank you for bearing with us. Assemblymember Cartney, is it a very brief follow-up?
It is a quick one. When you're putting investment into Access for All stations, do you also look at public toilet provision as well and see what you can do if you've got builders there and doing that. Because we've heard again that's a real issue for people being able to travel.
So in terms of the specific, there's not a standard. We always consider those things. What we do throughout our projects, though, is look at how we can be most efficient in going out and doing work. So we try to combine what we would call enhancements, funding, which Access for All is part of, with our standard renewals and upgrade of facilities. We know that when we go and combine different aspects of work and do them at the same time, that's the most cost efficient thing for us to do. So it is something that tends to come through that how do we plan our projects and our pipeline through the business to make sure we consider those things. We obviously also work with operators or local authorities in terms of schemes that they have. So I'm trying to think. So Wandsworth Town, I know, for example, the scheme currently looks at not just the Access for All elements, but also looks at station entrance and how accessibility there can be bettered through the station. So there's some quite good examples of where we've gone and done other things alongside Access for All schemes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Assemblyman McCartney. Okay, well, thank you very much to Kaylee and Alison for your responses, and thank you for bearing with us as we ran over a little bit. We're now going to take a short adjournment for 5 minutes before we move on to the second part of our discussion, the second panel. So please be back at 11:53, and thanks again to our guests. welcome back to the Transport Committee and our discussion on accessibility and inclusion in transport planning. And for this second panel, we're joined by James Mead, who's a General Manager for On-Demand Transport at Transport for London, and Imogen Westcott, Head of Assisted Transport at Transport for London. And thank you both for joining us today. So I'm going to start off with the first question, and then other Assembly members will be coming in with others. So first question is to James. And can I ask you if you're satisfied with the way Dial-A-Ride is currently operating and serving its members? And also, do you have any plans to improve or expand it in the future?
I'm really proud of the way Dial-A-Ride is operating today and the way we have for some time now. Satisfied, I don't know. That's a different kind of word, because that sort of indicates that we're kind of happy where we're at and don't necessarily want to keep improving. But that's very much not where we're at. We do want to improve. But I'm really, really proud of Dial-A-Ride and the work that we do. I've worked at TfL for 20 years in different capacities, and this is by a distance the most important job I've ever had. And I'm really proud. Every year we transport more than 600,000 people to where they want to go. And while that's really important, I think the other bit that maybe not everybody's aware of is the sort of pastoral role that we have as well. And I think our drivers, our contact center staff, everybody is so sees this as such a valuable service, and treat it as a vocation. And I think that not just getting the people where they want to go efficiently, which is obviously our key role, but the way that we do it and the way we help people, I think, is really important. And I think that our performance has been really strong as well. So we're meeting all of our metrics. We've been able to improve the service in that regard as far as the number of trips that we're able to deliver for people. We've brought in a new booking and scheduling system, which has added in the ability for people to book their trips through an app if they choose. We certainly keep the contact center open. And I think a lot of things that we do as well that maybe folks aren't as aware of, I'm also equally proud of. So the travel mentoring team that we've got, for instance, that Imogen works with, that goes out and helps people that want to travel independently that maybe don't want to use Dial-A-Ride. They want to use the rest of the network and need a little more confidence in using it. The travel mentoring team it does a tremendous job with that as well. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of Dial-A-Ride, and I've been just honored actually to be part of it. I think when we talk about what we want to do in future, I think absolutely there are things that we could do, and I know, and travel mentoring actually is one of them. We'd love to be able to expand that service a bit and start working a bit more with some other agencies and see if there's ways that we can maybe link in a bit better with other folks working in the same kind of area within accessible transport. So that'd be one of the things we'd like to be able to look at.
Thanks very much for that introduction to us. I'm going to hand over to Assemblymember Bukhari.
Thank you. Interesting about the kind of the positivity that you're referencing in terms of the answer there, because we have had a call for evidence on this investigation, and we were contacted by the Southwark Torch Fellowship Group, a Christian group for blind and partially sighted people, who wrote to us and were fairly dissatisfied actually with the service delivered by Dial-A-Ride, and in their words it's plummeted since November 2023, and very sadly they've also said that some of their members have just started not to use the service anymore, and one said it's not fair to us disabled people, which is pretty disappointing. So in reference to that, is TfL still receiving complaints following the November 2023 booking system update? And if so, how are you managing these, and what is being done to improve the service? Maybe Imogen can also come in with this as well as James.
Sure. So first, I'll start. Just apologize. I'm not familiar with that particular group, so we'll take that away and find out what's been happening there. And I would never say that we get everything right. And when we let people down, it really hits us, and we work hard to try and learn what we've done wrong. So in this case, I'll have to go back and find out what's happening with this particular group. In general, though, our trip fulfillment proportion is the highest it's ever been. So we're doing 92 to 93% of trip requests fulfilled, which is the highest it's ever been for Dial-A-Ride. So I think in general it's good. Now that doesn't help this group, obviously. They've had a worse experience than obviously we want them to have, and we'll do what we can to see what we can look into that. But overall, I think we're doing pretty well on that. As far as how the complaints process works or something, I guess, yeah, if Imogen, you want to talk about how we work with clients.
Yeah, I can share a bit on that. So with our complaints process, people can get in touch in a number of ways. We get complaints from people like yourself coming through, but usually people contact centre or through our email, they can get in touch. And generally our complaints has sat below 0.5 complaints per 1,000 journeys for the last 5 years. And you mentioned November 2023, there was a spike in complaints in that period, but that's now decreased again, and we're sitting around that sort of half a complaint per 1,000 journeys, which is really, really positive. When people do write into us with issues, we're looking to resolve those within 10 working days. So to get back to them within 10 working days, we might not be able to resolve it in that time, depending on the nature of how complex it is, but we will let people know that we've got it, we're looking into it, and what next steps they can expect. So we'll definitely pick that one up. That's also not a group I'm familiar with, so we can definitely look into that.
And then from 20, oh, sorry.
Sorry, yes.
No, I was just going to say, so November, you mentioned November and the switch to the new system. And absolutely, I think we've been pretty open that first sort of 8-10 weeks after the switch to the new system was hard, and we weren't providing a good service. And it was quite difficult for customers to get through on the phones. Our trip acceptance percentage wasn't good. And it was pretty poor service for 8 to 10 weeks, I'd say. But we kept working with our supplier. We've managed to turn it around considerably. I think right now we've got really quite a good system, as I say, and so overall it's going well. But yeah, we just have to apologize. Those first 8-10 weeks were pretty rough for folks. So.
It will be quite useful for the committee to have a breakdown of all the complaints that you've received, perhaps like on maybe a 5-year scale of where all those ups and downs have been, and it will be quite interesting, particularly that spike that you just mentioned in November 2023, just to see a comparative and how you've said that things have improved. It'd be interesting to see that breakdown very clearly for us. You mentioned all the new booking and the scheduling system, and you've said that you've been working on reducing the issues there. Members have been unable to get bookings that they want. There've been long waits. There've been email requests to be confirmed and longer than necessary return journeys. Are you saying that these issues have now started to be resolved?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would never say that they're resolved. Things happen on a daily basis, and sometimes we'll get a schedule wrong, or somebody will end up on a bus longer than we want. It's a hard thing to do, the scheduling. It's a really difficult and skilled role. So we do have things like that happen sometimes. But in general, yes, absolutely. So as I say, I think we're doing really well, scheduling 93% of our trips, and the time on the bus is down. So there will always be things we need to do, things we need to correct, absolutely, but we're in such a better place, and I feel confident in the service we're providing today.
So, as I understand it, under this new system, you're no longer able to book a recurring weekly pickup, which means that if you do have somebody who has a weekly club that they go to, they have to keep on going on to the system. I mean, is that correct, that this is the case?
Sorry, no, not quite. So you are able to book recurring journeys, and we do have recurring journeys. About 30% of our trips overall are people on regular journeys, so you are able to do it. There may be some confusion, because what we do is you can't necessarily just ask for one and get it. So we do review trips, for instance. The recurring trips, regular trips, have a much higher cancellation rate than those people who book for the next day or something like that, and used to be about 40%. Of course, if you have that high a cancellation rate, then you're denying trips to other people. So what we do now is somebody will call in and say, I'd like a regular trip to, I don't know, wherever, every Thursday at 10 o'clock. We'll take a look at what their travel patterns have been to date, and if they have been calling regularly and we're able to do it, then great. We'll set them up on a recurring journey. If it's the sort of thing where maybe they're doing it once a month or something like that, then we might not. But we take it under advisement, and we'll keep looking. We'll also keep looking. Often people want a recurring journey at a time that is like already really busy, and it may be difficult. So we may not always be able to offer a recurring journey, but we will keep it under advisement. And if a space opens up, then we can give them that recurring journey. But again, I think we're doing pretty well. As I say, about 30% of our trips overall are regular bookings for people.
Okay, but it's dependent on the passengers' experience with you and the way they use your service.
It is, and sometimes we'll call the customer up. So we'll see somebody that's going to, I don't know, they're going to the grocery store every Tuesday at noon or something like that, and reservations, so we all know. So this is the third week in a row you've gone. This is particularly with like newer members, let's say, and they'll notice it and they'll say, "Would you like us just to make this a regular booking for you?" So we can do it proactively as well if we notice it.
Okay. Well, I mean, it was one of the features that was very popular. So I'm pleased that there is still a way of it working differently, but it's still there. Okay. Now, as recently as October, I have, many of us are getting casework on this issue, but as recently as October, I received one particular piece of casework where there was bookings made 1 week in advance for one of your customers who's over 90 years old. And this booking then, each time they were making these bookings throughout the month of October, the cab would arrive very, very late, like about 40 minutes to an hour late. The driver would say they wouldn't even know where they were supposed to be going. And because of the issues that they were having to cancel the Dial-A-Ride service and then do their own private booking through a private cab fare and spend their own money doing this. Now, I notified TfL about this at the end of the month of October, and we've had no explanation, no apology, and no compensation. The customers that are going through these issues, should they have an expectation of getting an apology, an explanation, and compensation?
Sure, of course. So in this case, it was a taxi that didn't arrive. Is that okay? So we don't book a lot of taxis for customers. We try and use our own drivers, our own buses and so forth. But taxis do less than 5%. But if a customer isn't picked up by a taxi, then we will definitely refund anything that they pay. If they have to make their own arrangements, then absolutely we'll refund those. It sounds like we haven't done it in this case. I'm really sorry for this customer, but it's absolutely the case that we will do it. And if that has come through to us, then we'll definitely go back and have a look at it and see what we can do, unless you happen to know about this one.
Not this one. I'm sorry you haven't had a response and that the customers experience this. I will look into it. I will say around refunds, and I would have thought the customer would have been notified. We have got a bit of a delay since the cyber incident that we had in processing things, so it's taking a little more time. But yeah, I will pick this one up with my team.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Well, I look forward to getting that response for that particular case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. Thank you. Forgetting how to do a meeting. So yes, my question is about Dial-A-Ride, and what improvements and changes have been made since Transport for All and Age UK published their very brilliant report, Dial-A-Ride from Door to More, which was published in July 2022. So I was just wondering if you could, they kind of talked to a lot of Dial-A-Ride users and really got a flavour of sort of what it means to people to be able to have access to the service. So just exactly what has been done since 2022 when that report was published.
Sure, there are a number of things. So it was really interesting report because they spoke to 14 of our customers who'd had issues of one sort or another, and so it's always good to get that sort of feedback, whether it's from them or customers directly or through Imogen's team. And frankly, loads has happened since then. So one of the key requests, for instance, was to extend our operational hours, which at the time were till 10 o'clock. And so we have. And so now we operate till midnight. Effectively, for most customers, that means kind of an 11 o'clock last sort of pickup because the drivers have to get them back to their homes or wherever they're going, so which is where it was before. So we've extended that. And, to be fair, there hasn't been a whole lot of take-up on that. We get about 5 trips after 10 o'clock at night per day. But they're really important trips to those people that are using it. There are people that are going to West End shows or whatever it might be. So in that case, it's not about volume, really. It's about, the service that you're providing somebody. So we have extended to midnight, as I say, which was one of the recommendations. There are a number of things that I think were sort of relevant at the time that happily we've been able to resolve. So there are things like delays to getting through the phone lines, for instance, which today we answer every call within 2 minutes. All that sort of stuff was absolutely true at the time. We were struggling with some of our contact center things, but it's been a couple of years we've been able to deal with that. There are pretty much all the sorts of recommendations that they've asked for, we've been able to accomplish. Not everything. So, like, for instance, there was a request to be able to do callbacks if somebody was in the queue. And our system just doesn't do that. It doesn't recognize, it can't sort of track the way, I don't know, a ticketing system would or something. But it's really not an issue anymore because we're answering all the calls, so people aren't having to hang on for a long time, for instance. It was really useful feedback, and I think we've done quite a bit. I don't know if there was a specific item that they'd raised that you were curious about?
No, it was just generally, it's just because they'd made that effort to give you that very direct feedback.
And so to more engagement with them as well, actually, which has been really good.
And that's ongoing engagement.
Yeah, so we meet with them quarterly now to discuss things, and we've got our next meeting coming up in December where we're going to be focusing on driver training, so looking at how we're refreshing that and what our refresher training entails and getting some feedback from them and input, and also doing that with some other stakeholders. But I'd say the working relationships very positive from my perspective. We get a lot of good feedback and ongoing discussion, and it's a really useful forum. So that out of that report, that's been a really positive thing.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. And if I can come in just briefly before I hand over. So just to put some context, the constituent has written to me, and I think, James, at the beginning you said about how proud you are of this service, and the constituent has written to me saying, I want to reiterate my gratitude for the Dial-A-Ride service, which has been a tremendous support in my life. Dial-A-Ride is an incredible resource for disabled customers, providing us with a sense of independence that's truly invaluable. And I think we all agree how important it is for those who use it, and I think that's why some of the people who contact us are so passionate about when problems arise. I wonder whether you could tell me if you think Dial-A-Ride has the capacity to cope with the demands of this service, considering how vital it is for the people who rely on it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's crucial, isn't it? So we've definitely got the resources available. We've got the budget that we need to meet the targets, and it's been changing over time. So we had not surprisingly, we had a huge drop-off in usage during and just after the pandemic, and it took quite a while for people to get confidence, I think, was probably part of it, to come back to the service. And it's still lower, our usage is still lower than it was pre-pandemic, which again isn't too surprising because people made a lot of changes to their lives during the pandemic. So we've noticed, for instance, that more customers are doing, say, online shopping than they used to. We've also noticed that more carers are around more frequently because they're not necessarily going into the office 5 days a week they were pre-pandemic. So some of our members who might have used us 2 or 3 times in a week might be using us 1 time a week now, for instance. And the other thing that has really hit demand as well is destinations. So since the pandemic, about 200 destinations that we used to take people to closed and never reopened. So this is the really sad bit, because if people have made choices to do online shopping or whatever, well, yeah, that's great. That's a change in their lifestyle. But for folks that no longer have the opportunity to go to the day center that used to have, or the luncheon club, or whatever it may have been previously. Those are the ones that we feel bad about losing, if you will, because they're just not going to those activities that they used to be able to go to. So hopefully some of those will start coming back as well. But sorry, I've gotten a little off topic. But to your question, yes, we've got plenty of drivers, plenty of buses, plenty of reservationists. TfL has been excellent in supporting us with the budget that we need. And so since the pandemic, each year our budget has gone up a little bit to meet the needs of people as they're coming back into the service.
Thank you. Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. This is to Imogen. What does Dial-a-Ride stakeholder engagement look like?
Thank you. So in terms of stakeholder engagement, since I returned to from maternity leave earlier this year, we've been doing a lot of work both local groups and kind of national and regional groups across London. So mentioned Age UK and Transport for All, but also with smaller groups as well who've been in touch with us, and local borough meetings as well. So I guess we get approached by different people who would like us to come to meetings, and we do that engagement. But we're also working on a kind of more proactive plan of how we can engage going forwards, and I guess how we manage that. I suppose at the moment it's very much based on where people want us to go and how we want to take that forwards. And we also have our regular publications that we do. So we're doing twice a year now. We've moved back to doing our In Touch. We had a pause during the pandemic, and that's our magazine that goes out to members and also friends of Dial-a-Ride to talk about the different things that we offer and any changes or things in the service that people might be interested in. So I suppose there are different avenues. And in terms of meeting different customer needs, we have a record of what kind of different needs customers have in terms of ways they might want to be contacted or engaged with. And as I mentioned, our next set of engagement going forwards, we're going to be looking at driver training and how we can get input from stakeholders on that. So we've got some meetings coming up starting in December to get input from people.
Thank you. We obviously put out a call for evidence, and I won't name the group, but the group said the service delivered by Dial-a-Ride has plummeted since November 23, and then they're asking us to investigate the reasons for this plummeting of service. They also said that one of our members has been using the service to attend meetings since 2009. Recent failures are not fair to us disabled people. And then another observation was that the team showed that between March 22 and October 23, 91% of groups' requested journeys were provided, whereas November 23, this has fallen to 56%. That's quite critical. And I just wonder why this particular group feels that there's been such a downturn in the service since November 2023.
So obviously I don't know the group specifically, and I'm sorry if they're not having a good experience. I think it would be interesting to know whether it's gotten better recently, because I think I've been clear it wasn't very good in November of 23, no doubt about it. But it is a tricky balance. And again, I don't know this particular group you're talking about, of course, but it is really hard to balance these things sometimes. We've got an awful lot of people trying to use the service often at the exact same time. And so we can't guarantee 100% trip delivery. We try and do our best to fulfill as many trip requests as we possibly can. We recognize how important this service is to everyone, and we know that anybody who doesn't get a trip when they want it, we feel bad. We feel like we've let them down. There are things that we might be able to look at, though. Sometimes, people need very specific times, for instance. Well, within our service, sometimes we need a little more flexibility from people. We may not be able to get them there at 10, but maybe we can at 10:15, or things like that. So we do need some help sometimes from our customers as well to be able to do that, because we're not an Uber sort of system, if you will. But any group like that, when we've got folks that come through, we work really hard to try and resolve those sorts of situations, and and I know Imogen's team works closely with a number of groups to try and arrange for like regular trips if we need to. If we know it's a particular activity that a certain group of people are going to every week, then that's the kind of thing that we really hope that we're able to accommodate. It can be a bit trickier if you've got different people going different places at different times, of course.
Well, I'm sure the committee clerks can put you in touch with that particular organisation, but I didn't want to advertise. Maybe you are in touch with them, but I didn't want to publicly announce that. I did a report, I think 5 or 6 years ago, and I did just get the feeling, and I don't mean this in any disrespectful way, but I just got the feeling that Dial-A-Ride was being run and timetabled for the benefit of Dial-A-Ride rather than for the benefit of the users. Can you assure me that that situation has improved?
Absolutely. So we definitely do not run it for the benefit of Dial-A-Ride. I mean, I think the fact, as I say, that we run till midnight these days, that's not a financially efficient thing. It's not a resource efficient thing. It's that is not something that we do for Dial-A-Ride. We do it for our customers. Same as the scheduling goes. Our whole ethos, our whole reason for being is trying to get people to where they want to go as safely and quickly and helpfully as we can. So, but what I will say is, we are trying to serve everybody, and that is a difficult balance to do, and sometimes we do disappoint people. I fully recognize 92, 93% is a great number, but that means 7 or 8% aren't getting the particular trip they want. Now, hopefully, we've been able to help some of those people, scheduling them at a different time or a different day or something like that. We don't want people to just be refused and sort of walk away. So we do absolutely everything we can to get people where they want and need to go. But we work to the customer's request. Many schemes around the world don't schedule around the customer the way we do. If a customer calls us and says, I want to go to the grocery store 10 o'clock on Tuesday, we will do everything we can to get that customer to that grocery store 10 o'clock on Tuesday. Many schemes around the world will say, we go to the local grocery store Thursdays at 10 and Fridays at 3. We'll expect you to fit in with our schedule. We are exactly the opposite of that. And I will say we don't always get it right, and I think it's been pointed out we don't always get it right, but we start with the customer and what the customer wants to do, and then we try and work around
that. Just one final question around, probably a bit controversial. Is it possible that maybe you are serving too wide an audience, and maybe that an alternative method could be used for some of the users, the more physically able, and that maybe you could focus on those who are less mobile and provide a better service for them? A thought.
So, yeah. I think at the moment, we sort of are able to do a bit of that with the vehicles that we use and which partners we use, for instance. So a customer with really specific mobility issues, with serious ones, we will always put on like a Dial-A-Ride bus, for instance, because we've got the buses are created for it, really, and because our drivers are trained in that sort of thing. There may be other customers that are more able that can use a community transport bus, for instance, and the community transport organizations deliver about 30% of our trips for us. Also very good, also specialized, maybe not quite as specialized as us. And then some customers we will use a taxi for instance, because they are able to travel in a taxi or a private hire vehicle, as the case may be. So we do mix it up a bit with as best we can within customer needs within the service that we offer.
Can I also come in and
Sure.
talk a little bit about travel mentoring?
Yes.
I'd say this is probably where our travel mentoring scheme comes in for those customers who want to travel independently. That is it's a team of, it's very small, 5 people, but they cover all of London, and one of their roles is supporting people to travel independently on public transport, and it's something that I suppose would like to see grow more. But if people are interested, there are no barriers to being able to access that service. You can self-refer, and they will come and do one-on-one mentoring with you, supporting you in your own way and with your own needs to access the public transport network. So I think that's a really good opportunity for people if they want to travel independently but maybe feel that Dial-A-Ride isn't quite the right fit for them. That might be the way to go.
That's a brilliant example, actually, and it's one of the things. The travel mentoring team is fabulous in how they manage these things. So sometimes it can be somebody, maybe they've just started using a mobility scooter, for instance, and there's a skill to getting a mobility scooter onto a bus. You need to be able to do kind of the 3-point turn. You've got people looking at you and all that sort of thing. And the travel mentors do a fantastic job of saying, okay, here's how you get on, here's how it works. We do bus days where groups of people can come, and we'll go be working with a bus garage, and they will help people there. There'll be a group of people saying, okay, here's how it gets on, here's where the ramp's going to come out, here's what to look at. But also, increasingly, the travel mentors are working with people that are neurodiverse. So there's somebody who doesn't have a visible impairment, if you will, but they're neurodiverse, and maybe they've got autism. And so one of the things they'll help them do is be able to go to a bus stop, for instance, and try and cut through the sensory overload that they're experiencing and say, okay, this is how you're able to read one of the countdown boards, for instance. This is how you're able to identify which bus you're after, and really trying to help them deal with some of those things, or how to get on a DLR tube station, things like that. So it's a fantastic service, and I think it sort of speaks to the kind of thing you're talking about. People that want to be able to travel independently don't need a dial-ride red bus showing up, but maybe don't quite have the confidence yet to be able to go out on the network on their own. The travel mentoring team can get them there.
Sorry, are these volunteers, these?
No, they're permanent paid members of staff in TfL. This is what they do, and part of their role is also working with, for people with mental or physical disabilities, or maybe bad anxiety, and you can refer yourself to them, and they will come. They start usually with people going to their home, understanding a bit about them, and then they will slowly build on those trips with people to get them travelling independently.
Yeah, can you provide us with the link for that?
Yes, definitely.
We get referrals from occupational health at the NHS, loads of things like that as well. So it's a known service. It's good.
Assemblymember Russell.
Yes, I just wanted to come in on the travel mentoring because I actually helped someone the other day who'd fallen off a bus and reported the incident to TfL, and she got referred to the travel mentoring service. She's an older person in her 90s, and she was really upset by having fallen, and just you talking about it, it's like, it's happening in practice, and really, really helpful.
Thanks. And if I can come in here, I want to ask the opposite question to Assemblymember Frentzer, or one of his points, which was, should you be sort of providing the full dial-a-ride service to a more targeted group of people, which is obviously you've talked about how the number of journeys has dropped quite drastically since 2018-19 to now. It's halved the journeys. But certainly with the report that came out from Transport for All and Age UK a couple of years ago, one of the things they highlighted was there's loads of people who are absolutely the sort of people who could benefit for this, and that could really give them more opportunity to get out and about, who are not aware of the service at all. So obviously you're saying the budget is enough, you have enough drivers, but for a much reduced service than you provided a few years ago. Is that not an opportunity to say, well, hold on a minute, we know we provide this service which is so valuable to people. Should we not be looking for more people who actually need it?
So we do engage. We've done certain things since the pandemic, for instance, we didn't do before. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. So, for instance, now one of the best things we know is people see our buses. So we've now got our phone number and our website on the buses. We didn't do that before. And the buses are great advertising because they're going to the places that people that could use the service go to, if I've said that correctly. And they're out in residential areas. They're frequently in places where other forms of advertising media don't get to. Let's say we've got the In Touch, the magazine that Imogen's mentioned. We also have various sorts of contacts with stakeholders that we need. That represent the sorts of people that might use the service. So do I think there's more we could do? Probably, and I think that's one of the things that we're looking to see how we can, expand that. I don't know if you want to come in on that, but it is the sort of thing we think we probably could do more of. But I think one of the things the report did mention is that there are a lot of people would be eligible, but that's not necessarily the same as the number of people who need the service, if you see what I mean. So again, because there have been changes in the way people shop, in the way people interact, in the closure of events, things like that, it's not necessarily the same. The fact that you're eligible means that you need it. But we are always going to welcome more customers. You know, anybody that wants to apply, we are more than welcome.
But you don't have the capacity for more customers.
We do.
Well, you have less drivers, less budget, less journeys. But if the number of journeys went up to where it was in 2018-19, you just wouldn't be able to cope. I mean, that's just on you know. Unless you're telling me different, unless you're telling me you're only delivering half the journeys that you're capable of doing, which I think would be very unlikely. I just think that this is, to be perfectly honest, it feels like this service is being provided but being run down. That's the impression I get. That it's like, well, we will do it, but we'll keep it over here. And we'll hit our targets, but we're not actually going to say this is a vital service to a large proportion of Londoners, and we are going to proactively find the people who need it because, okay, maybe the services they have used are no longer running, but they may want to find something else. This is you know, TfL is here to serve Londoners, and there are people who cannot get about anymore and don't have those services, and we should be doing more to that. And it just doesn't feel like increasing the ridership of this service. Anywhere else in TfL would be wanting to increase the ridership, wouldn't we? Why aren't we doing it here? Why are there no targets around that?
So I think there are two things. One, just to be clear, the budget and the drivers and things that we have today are based on demand. That's not a limit. We haven't been told you can't have any more drivers, you can't have any more contact center staff, you can't have any more budget. Our budget is forecast on what we think our demand will be, and our demand has been growing. So our budget this year is bigger than our budget last year.
But it is lower than it was. I know, you know, but let's be honest, it's lower than it was.
Sure.
And also, if you're saying it's based on demand, but people don't know about it, and you're not yet telling us proactively what you're doing to find the audiences for the service. And look, I appreciate the buses are a good advert, but okay, I'm not somebody who has so far needed the service. But I used to see them before I worked in transport, going around all over the place. I had absolutely no idea what they were. Oh, one of those red buses. So that's not really necessarily enough to let people know the value that the service could give them.
Sure, and I think the sort of thing we'd like to be able to do is just to continue to work more with partners. So Imogen's talked about some of the stakeholder thing, because I think one of the things that is really helpful is when we have people who are engaging with the sorts of folks that would like to use Dial-A-Ride, they're the best advertisement. They're our best way to reach these people. And so I think it's a fair comment that we need to do more of that, and that's one of the things we are working on. I think Imogen's touched on it already, that we are trying to expand our reach with stakeholders and with those groups, because they are absolutely vital to us being able to get out and reach more people.
Over the last few months, we've attended quite a few borough mobility forums, so I think that's a good way to reach out to people. And we have now got, I think James mentioned before, with the NHS occupational therapists, some good links into hospitals with people who maybe have had a change in their situation and might need the service. So we're finding that that's helping, but there is definitely more to do. And that's planned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would you consider setting targets or setting aims for growing the service?
Probably no. I don't think I'd want to be setting targets, because I don't know what a sensible target would be, to be honest. We want to be able to serve people as much as we possibly can, and we want to increase the social benefits of what we do. So I don't want us to just completely focus on how many trips we're doing. It's also sort of the types of trips we're doing, and are we able to get people out of their isolation, and those sorts of things, all those benefits. So I don't think there's a lot of value in setting a target on something like this, because we don't necessarily know how many people should use the service. You know, we want to be available for anybody that wants to be able to use it. But I wouldn't want us to say, oh, we haven't delivered X number of trips, so it's a failure, and be going out sort of dragooning people on service. So we want to make sure that we are available for anybody that wants to grow the service. We do want to make sure that everybody who could use the service knows about the service. And as I think we're saying, we do think we need to do more around that, trying to get it out there.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Mahfouz.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, congratulations, Imogen, on your relatively new arrival. My question to you is, obviously, we've heard earlier as part of the panel some of the challenges when the new portal came in. I won't go over those again, but clearly, as developing any new portal, any new system, you'd be taking on board stakeholder engagement, and you would look to feed that into what that looked like. So we've heard obviously a lot from yourself, James, in terms of the convenience factor of the service, and clearly that's going to be probably head and shoulders above other elements of what stakeholders are asking for from a new system. But can you tell us what were stakeholders asking for before the new system came into place? What were you able to meet in terms of what they were asking for? And perhaps some of those areas that you weren't able to deliver straight away but are looking to introduce going forward?
So I think some of the things we were able to introduce, I mean, the booking through the app was a big one. So about 20% of our customers now book journeys through the app. I do think there was some concern from folks early on that we were going to then cut back on the contact center. I know that was a real concern beforehand. I think we've proven that we're not. It is absolutely just an option. Some people like using an app. Some people don't want to be on the phone. Other people enjoy the contact center contact, and that's great. So we've made sure that the contact center is operating really well, and I think it says. So, but the app has been really helpful, and it did also provide some other things for customers as well. So not just the booking ability, but now they can actually see where their bus is on its way, so they're able to sort of get ready. We've always been able, well, not always, but for a long time we've been able to send text messages to customers whose driver is, approximately this far away. But now they're able to actually look on it and see it, and that's quite helpful. We've also made it easier for carers, for instance, to book trips for their customers, for their family members, people like that, who are able to then book through the app specifically. And so those have been quite positive. I think the ability as well to be able to change your booking online. You don't have to ring us up, and before you would have to sort of wait to see if it was going to be accepted or not. Now you can change your booking through the app again, if you like. So I think those have all been really positive. There's still things that we would like to get better. So like our group bookings function is still a bit difficult. It's a bit clunky. You've got to sort of email us and we go through, and we'd like to do that more quickly at sort of a more basic level. There's still issues around the map, for instance, which isn't surprising. There are things that aren't getting updated, like I don't know, tell you to go left on Acacia Avenue when you should be going right or whatever it might be. So there's some kind of details around that sort of thing that I think that would help as well. But those sorts of things we've been able to do. So I think in general the new system has been a lot better for the customers. We've been able to incorporate a great deal of the feedback that we had, and it's good too because it's also configurable. So we were able to do things like change the coloring on the app and on the website, for instance. So we're well above kind of accessibility criteria for that sort of thing as well. It's also allowed us to be a lot more flexible with offering customers different times. For instance, the algorithms behind the network will then present us, if we can't, if we don't have a ride at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday when the customer wants it, we get many more options that we can try and find a better time to meet the customer, which we couldn't do before. But I think in future, it's less about probably adding new features as such than it is trying to really hone in on those areas where it's still not performing the way we'd like it to. Because it is efficient, like I say 92-93% is great, but we still want it to get better. We want to get to 95-96%, or as high as we can go, we don't know, but it's that sort of thing that I think we need to work on, all that fine tuning.
So I mean, I think from what you're saying, that the group bookings seems to still be the sort of one key area of focus going forward.
Yeah, it's just less convenient. I mean, it still works. You send us an email, we book it, but it's kind of, we've got somebody behind the scenes doing a group booking, whereas I'm sure their organizations would like to just be able to just go online, do their booking, be done with it, We just don't have that facility. So, again, some sort of activity center might say, okay, we know we've got 8 people coming from here that are going to get here. We'll just book it ourselves, but you've got to send us an email, and we do it, and then we get back in touch with you. And it's, it works, but it's not seamless.
And in terms of one of the measurements, I guess, in terms of how successful the new system is the number of complaints that you'd be receiving. So how was that at the start, and how has that changed in the last few months as you've embedded the system in?
So it did jump. I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but it was a lot higher. We're now down at 0.5 per 1,000, which is kind of where it's averaged, I suppose, over the last 5 years. But we definitely had a significant spike when the new system came in, and we had issues around trips and bookings. And I think it probably took 2 or 3 months to see that settle down. But we can provide the exact figures.
Thank you. And then I think sometimes when you've got a service that's perhaps more convenient than similar alternatives, so just to take a stat in terms of social isolation, as you referred to there, James, we know that social isolation can be the equivalent for an individual of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So actually getting people out and engage with other people within the community is hugely important to them. But when you've got an alternative, for example, for visits to the NHS services, actually this could be more convenient. How do you work with the NHS to make sure that people are using the right service in the right situation?
Yeah, that's an excellent example, actually, because it can be confusing for our customers, because of the way the funding works. There are certain trips that have to be delivered by the NHS, and there are certain trips that have to be delivered by Dial-A-Ride, and that is one of the things that can be difficult for our customers. Like, all right, who do I call? But our reservationists are very very well trained on that, and we're able to help with that. I think that in an ideal world, it would be great if we just had one phone number, wouldn't it? And you wouldn't have to have 5 or 6 on your refrigerator to say, okay, where am I going today? Okay, it's physical therapy. I need to call this group. Oh, I'm going to the hospital. I need to call this group. I'm going to bingo. I'll call Dial-A-Ride, or whatever it might be in an ideal world. So I think it's imperative for us to do the best that we can to let people know what we are available for, and make sure that they're understanding. We do work with the NHS. I think Imogen's already touched on some of the folks that we work with to try and be clear on that. But yeah, in an aspiration, it would be great if it was one group delivering everywhere, but that's complicated.
And I guess just finally, quite quickly, probably, James or Imogen, is that something you're looking to factor into the booking system so that it helps?
So from that standpoint, as far as like the advice we're able to give customers, that's fine. That's in the booking system and that sort of thing. The booking system has the ability, were it ever to happen, the booking system can deal with multiple funding sources and multiple delivery points. So you could have a situation where we'd be able to book people to NHS trips and take the, deal with any payments that had to be made or things like that through a single contact center. So theoretically, it's there. You could do it. But obviously, there's an awful lot involved then in trying to manage multiple organizations around that thing. So I think at this point, we really focus on making sure that we're giving customers the right information about who they can contact. And the reservations are also really well trained, as are the drivers, of being able to assist customers if we need to with sort of identifying resources, if you will, which may be part of what you were asking. So the drivers sometimes will notice, let's say, for example, that perhaps a customer that they've had for several years, maybe they're noticing that there's a little bit of cognitive decline or something, and then they will make referrals to us, to Imogen's team, really, and then we'll get in touch with the local services if need be, that sort of thing. So we do recognize, we try and recognize the whole person with something like this and try and get them whatever the appropriate service might be.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Assemblymember Foos. And I think, so I've got a couple of wrap-up questions, and one specific, one general, other than that, yeah? Yes, I've got a specific question and then a general question. Specifically, it's about, we've talked about the number of drivers, and we discovered in June 2021 that actually you'd lost about a third of the operational staff due to a voluntary exit programme to drivers and operational staff. We were told that was as a result of reduced demand during the pandemic. So are you still operating with those reduced levels of operational staff, or what's the staffing situation at the moment?
No, absolutely not. So we've been hiring as needed as we go. So you're absolutely right. So post-pandemic, we were at sort of 15% of demand for a long time, and it grew slowly. So we did something called an exit program, and what that did was we allowed our colleagues to sort of choose. It was entirely voluntary. There were no redundancies, no compulsory exits or anything like that. And you could either choose to stay with Dial-A-Ride, and continue your career with us. You could transfer to London Underground and work as a CSA, or you could take early retirement and take severance with that. And that was fine. We had some people go to LU. We had a bunch of people stay with us. We had some people choose retirement at that point. And so that was, as you say, we had quite a low number then. But we've subsequently just been hiring all the time to get ourselves up to whatever the demand is. So at the moment, We've got something like 164 drivers, I'm going to say, and we've got 70 people in the contact center, whereas at the time we were down, well under those numbers. So there's never been a restriction on us hiring people back as and when we need to, and that was always part of the plan with the exit program. It was approved, all the way up to commissioner level, that we get that you're going down to this level now. And part of that was also because we didn't know what was going to happen afterwards. We just had no idea after the pandemic what demand might be. Was it going to come back to what it was before? Was it never going to come back to anything close? Were people not going to come back to the service? We really didn't know. And for a year, we were so low on numbers. We were really kind of wondering. But anyway, sorry. So we've never had a restriction on it. We do hire people as and when needed in all our areas.
Yeah. And just in terms of the drivers and the operational staff, that their understanding, their knowledge, their support of the users of service is really, really important. So given there's obviously been quite a turnover with people leaving, and how do you make sure that that level of support and knowledge is kept up to a good level?
So we do quite extensive training when people join the service. So for drivers, there's bespoke in-house training course that we run, and it focuses on a wide range of things, but includes disability equality training, which is delivered by people with lived experience, and then also specific things around dementia and neurodiversity. And we undertake that classroom training, and they also spend then some time, once they've completed that classroom training, out on the service with a buddy driver who's got experience, so that they're not going out by themselves. So they'll spend a number of weeks doing that before being finally assessed and signed off. And all of our training that we do is City and Guilds accredited, so it's to a really high standard. And I suppose for our partner organisations, they undertake MIDAS training, so that's the kind of community transport developed training for people in that sector. And so it's to a high standard, so that we know that everybody out there has got the knowledge that they need. And as I mentioned before, we're looking at how we refresh that training, what else we might want to bring into it, but we're also looking at how we then continue with our kind of 3-year refresher program of driver training, which covers the basic things that they need to know, but also new things that may have changed. So we're working on that and getting stakeholder input into it.
Thanks. That's really helpful. I wonder whether you'd be able to share the training programme with us. That would be great. And finally, this is a subject that we get a huge amount of, comparatively loads of contact about. Like I say, people care very much about the service, very, very passionate about it. Would you be open to us discussing how that we could make sure that when we get feedback, we can sort of fast track it to you, so that we can be assured that things they're getting resolved? Is that something you'd be happy to discuss with us?
Sure. I mean, we can talk to our teams about how that comes through to us and make sure that we're getting it quickly and responding quickly as well. Absolutely.
That would be great. Thank you. Okay, well, I'd like to thank you, James, thank you, Imogen, for attending today and for your answers to our questions. The committee has just a small number of items of business to deal with. You can feel free to leave the chamber, or you can hold on just for a couple of minutes. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion?
Noted.
And can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Can we note the work programme and meeting dates?
Noted.
And the next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 10th of December 2024 at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3, City Hall. We're being dumped out into the committee rooms. And there is no urgent business. Thank you. The meeting is now closed.
Authority. Please stand by.